All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we're talking about literature and infighting within the scientific community and how stupid this all is.
It's I didn't do this on purpose because I'm old and forgetful and I completely forgot what we were doing today. I just got done listening to Graham Hancock on channel I've mentioned here before, Midnight's Edge. He was interviewed. It's a little over an hour interview and it's great stuff. Um, it I didn't watch the whole thing, but the parts of his most recent appearance on Rogan that I did watch, I found it annoying because Rogan has a tendency to go off on tangents and be interested in stuff I'm not interested in. And
Yeah,
um
Rogan wants to talk about Atlantis, I'm assuming, with Hancock. Yeah.
yeah, and then magic mushroom trips and stuff like that. I have absolutely no interest in going to South America on a ayahuasca vacation. Um,
I do. I actually want to do that at least once in my life. Maybe not South
I,
America for ayahuasca, but
yeah,
maybe Austin for DMT or something.
I will say that I understand the appeal, but to go out of your way to do that strikes me as very odd. Anyway,
Well,
so th
part of me just says I can't talk on it unless I've actually experienced it.
I mean, true.
Yeah.
Um, but Andre, the head of the Midnight's Edge channel, who was interviewing him, kept it much more focused on, you know, on the Ancient Apocalypse
I was
series.
I was just about to ask. Remind me if Graham Hancock was Ancient Apocalypse, and you were
Yes,
you were right. Okay, so I
but
was right in my head.
but why it was so good is that he focused on that, but he didn't just talk about that because he went back and gave the backstory for Graham Hancock of where he came from. He started with his early professional career and went through uh what led him to get interested in this idea of uh, uh ancient prehistorical ice age advanced civilizations. What led him to this idea, which a lot of the criticisms of ancient apocalypse completely ignored or distorted. Um, and so you got a much better you got a much deeper understanding of the thesis that is presented in ancient apocalypse, and then a much uh, a much more nuanced understanding of his contention with the archaeological community. And one of the thoughts I had while I was watching this is when he was talking about uh, the institutional rigidity, the institutional groupthink of the archaeological in community and professional archaeology. And the first thing that popped into my head is, well, you're just talking about academia in general. So much of the criticisms, and I can relate this personally, as I have rants about the public education system that I haven't gone into that I can't talk about when I go home because my mom's a lifelong public school teacher. And so this was something that I thought was really interesting that Hancock pointed out is that um, my problem is with archaeology as an institution, not with archaeologists. And he pointed out there were numerous archaeologists that were on Ancient Apocalypse, that were interviewed for Ancient Apocalypse. And these weren't, the critics tried to paint this as ancient aliens crap. And these were people who weren't necessarily within the mainstream narrative of academic archaeology, but they were still academics. They were still PhDs. They were still professional archaeologists who did this for a living. And they
Well,
they talked about this stuff.
he's a victim of, and by his own willingness of presentation, because
True.
it was presented as this maybe there was this advanced civilization way before, and the lost city of Atlantis or whatever, and aliens and lizard people, and I'm exaggerating a little bit,
Right,
obviously,
right.
but that there was an advanced civilization that was here before that was going to these other civilizations and helping them along, when realistically the archaeological evidence they kept bringing forward could have been presented as it was, but it wouldn't have been an easy sell to Netflix. It could have been presented as what we saw when in our biblical discussion, when I brought up how much longer Native Americans have been in America than we previously thought,
Mhm.
because now we have fossil records that say, "Oh my goodness, add a zero to that, 50,000 years ago
That's
to
a big difference.
150,000 years ago."
Yes,
And
just a bit outside.
realistically, that's what he found in all these places. He found underneath that one that was
Mhm,
5,000 years
mhm.
old, they found one that was 15,000 years old. And it's just okay, so we can update the model without saying, "Oh, this thing that's fantastical existed." You can still hold it as we can't disprove it, but at the same time, he could have it could have
Mhm.
been presented in that way, and that's what these archaeologists were actually arguing. It's just presented in a fantastical
Right.
way for views on Netflix,
Yeah, there, and that was when we talked about it
which
way
is
back
actually
when I
going to
first
segue
watched
us
it.
because
Mhm.
what I'm going to talk about with this article that I'm going to bring up is if they're straw manning a portion of the psychological literature, whereas some of the people that are promoting that psychological literature should make it more clear where they actually stand
Right.
in their lane of this. But go ahead and
And
finish your thought, and then I'll go into mine.
so let's segue into that because what let me just add on to what you were saying of where the Ancient Apocalypse show goes wrong. And he should have seen this coming, and he admitted this in this interview of uh uh and Andre brought up that he'd made a video about one of these critiques, which was from The Guardian. And it was clear that the guy who wrote the article did not watch the series because he started basically intimating that Hancock was one of these ancient aliens weirdos. That never came up anywhere even remotely in the series. But it's a lot, as Hancock says, it's a lot easier to attack a TV show than a work of literature. He pointed out the books that preceded the show, in which he has huge chunks of footnotes and sources and references, and spent lots of time, you know, as you do when you're writing a major nonfiction book, spent lots of time fact checking all this stuff. So on the one hand, he's right that it's a lot easier to attack a show, but on the other hand, to your point, he should have seen that coming,
Mhm.
especially with the way he presented it. However,
Well, I think the rebuttal to that is just to be honest about that. Instead of try
mhm,
to defend every
mhm,
attack thrown at you, just be like, "Look, we had to sell a show, and of course we dramatized it, but it's a dramatization based on all of this, and just hold up a stack of books."
exactly. And the 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 main thesis of the show, if you kind of strip away some of the TV nonsense, was, as he said in this interview, his contention with academic archaeology is that there is no way that you can say with such certainty that this is what is. You have no way of knowing that with the certainty that you present it. And that is absolutely true. The other thing that is absolutely true that bleeds over into these general discussions of academia and of these topics in public discourse is that the rebuttals from the professional community to Ancient Apocalypse, a lot of them were, let's frankly and colloquially, these were butthurt people. These
Mhm.
were people who took his attacks on the institution personally, and they reacted as such. And that is, yeah, you should have seen some of this coming with the TV-ness of the show, but most of that is on them for taking it personally. For instance, we can't talk about gender dysphoria anymore because someone will scream, "You're trying to erase my existence." The hell are you talking about? No, I'm not. I'm talking about this general philosophical and scientific idea. And you are instantly, because you have locked so much of your personal identity into this thing, that if this thing is attacked generally, then I am viciously attacking you personally, and on a level that
Well,
they equate
you're
it to
discounting
actual
one thing.
physical violence.
You're discounting one thing, that is their defense for their ideology. That this is not their own personal feelings per se. It's how they're told to feel about it,
True, true.
because it is the it's the Bailey to the Mott, right? It's the
Right.
retreat back to the castle. You're harming me in this way because you can't validate my feelings. But let's not digress too much, because we do have a hard out right for you
Mhm.
too. So that gives us another 40 minutes. So for those that think we've been going too long lately, we actually have to stay on task today.
Yep.
But clipping before it ever there was ever an internet, you just brought up the if you just see it this way or hear the other words. That reminded me of an example in the psychological literature, John Watson. And if anybody that doesn't know who he is, here's the famous clip of his literature that gets thrown around. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed, and my own specified world to bring them up, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select: a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, regardless of their innate talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. So that's the part that he's clipped, and he gets run through the mud all the time for that. That you can't just take anybody and make them anything. You can't take uh someone who's built like a jockey and make them Akeem Olajuwon, right? Uh, what they don't tell you is the follow up to that is, I am going beyond my facts and I admit it. This is actually his words. But so have the advocates of the contrary, and they have been doing so for many thousands of years. So he made this ridiculous statement to drive a point, and then said, yeah, I know I'm going beyond my means here, but so are the people that saying you can't shape people, that that everything is genetic, you're born with it,
Mhm.
you can't do any kind of behavioral therapy, you can't do any of this. So one of the famous clippings of the 1950s there, in the YouTube age of the 1950s. But that's exactly what we're dealing with in your example, and then going forward. uh but this, let's get to the straw man itself. So for those that actually can see, this is the paper I'm talking about, which I have to read for my developmental psych class: Evolving Evolutionary Psychology. uh I'm going to skip down. I read this on a previous episode to tease, but basically they give their little abstract here uh, to address the challenges facing evolutionary psychology. And there's your main author there. But the one I want to highlight there is this statement, and this statement says it all. A useful evolutionary psychology needs to be grounded in conceptual advances, not just empirical output. At the level of sheer empirical generativity, few can seriously challenge, this is narrow evolutionary psychology's in NEP prowess, but data, findings, and the theories that frame them are of inherently limited value when they emanate from flawed conceptual presuppositions. So, translation, yeah, they got all the facts right, but we don't like it because we can't, it's not framed the way we want. But here's the problem with that, and this is why I have big beef. This whole paper is just dragging the EP guys, the evolutionary psychology guys, down because they don't think the way they should. But at the same time, that's not what they're doing. They're not saying we evolved, as omnivores, so everybody should eat meat. We did this, God forbid, females prefer males, so we are a sexually reproducing species, and oh my gosh, they have different prioritizing in selecting a mate than males do, because they have more costly gametes, they have the cost of pregnancy, they have the cost of taking care of the child after the baby is born. Whereas the male, all he has to do is make sure that it's his baby, which means he sticks around long enough to make sure she's not getting pregnant from somebody else. And then now you add to that, female jealousy is about the guy sticking around, where male jealousy is about, I don't know that that's my baby inside her, so I have to be bossy over her until I
Mhm.
know the baby's born. from the time that I mated with her till after the baby's born. Okay, so they're just making these statements. How it fits into the current culture and everything, that's where the generalists or the other people can come in and say, oh, okay, well, you've just identified this thing. Well, people are dysfunctional here. Examples stick with the dating scene today, where women are kind of confused because they're putting out on the first date and they can't get a guy to stick around, right? That's when we as the behaviorists come in and say, oh, okay, so we acknowledge all of these things. Now, how do we help you adapt to this world? That's how it should work. But if you push the first one away and say, well, it's all about culture or it's all about what we can do, then you don't have a basis to go from. You can just make up shit, which is what they're doing.
This is narrative before facts kind of stuff. And this is why I prologued with this Graham Hancock interview, because that was his point in the interview that needed to be made more strongly in the show, is that the problem that academic archaeology has is that when there is a new finding, anytime there is a new finding, so he used as an example, because this was one of his earlier books that got him interested in this topic, was about the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a very weird thing that is not really understood, and there's a lot of reasons for that I won't go into. And there is a group, not just of the Hancocks, but of professional archaeologists that think this structure is much older than we think it is. The academic narrative says this structure was built during a particular dynasty. It must have been, because we have already determined these other things. Okay, but what something like the Sphinx should do is make you think, wait, are these other things that we have already determined, was that actually the case? Is that actually so? So for instance, one of the reasons they have refused to even contemplate that some of these prehistory megalithic big stone structures are prehistory is because the prevailing wisdom for over a century has been that you have to have agriculture before you can have large structures, because you have to have surplus before you can have people, before you can have a significant group of the population who specialize in something other than gathering food.
Let me go back to the paper, because when you straw man, this is important. When you straw man an argument, or you straw man your opposition, who you're actually attacking in your argument, you're allowed to make statements like this. Because neo-Darwinists explicitly reject the idea that organisms can influence their own evolution, the phenomenon of niche construction again suggests a different conceptualization of evolutionary explanation is needed. That's the most strawman claim that I've ever seen from any evolutionist. Even Darwin himself, who was just kind of piecing this stuff together, never would have made that claim. To reject the fact that we can influence our own environments, therefore our own evolution, we could not really digest lactose after infancy when we were children, but we learned to farm and harvest milk, and over time we were able to do that. Yes, of course, we can affect our own evolution over time. What we call the problem with social media and phones in our pocket and everything, we will evolve to. It just takes a lot longer than these people would like to think. It takes a very long time, and it's going to be a big growing period. Then let's skip forward. Is it the right one? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so they're still talking about why the evolutionary theory is wrong. This sort of finding has led theorists to argue that developmental plasticity might even play a central directing role in evolution. So the fact that our minds can adjust to our environments disproves evolutionary theory, according to this author. No, this is precisely what evolutionary psychologists argue, is our brains were developed to develop around our culture. The reason it take till we're about 25 years old for our prefrontal cortex to be fully formed is because we take a long time to socialize, and we have growth stages. You're not the same person as an adolescent as you are as a young adult. Even in the old days, your role of as an infant and toddler running around pushing, bushes with a stick and, playing with other kids versus throwing a spear at the mammoth 5 years later is a completely massive change over the course of those 5 years. Whereas the gazelle pops out, hops on its feet, and knows to run away from lion right away.
I was just thinking that as an example is you look at herbivores on the plains, and there's a couple seconds of wobbliness, and then you better get your footing because you got to run. And take a more simple example than us and just look at primates. They they aren't that way. You will have, like, I think orangutans, one of the reasons they're so endangered is because they have something like a 2-year reproductive cycle, because the child will cling to its mother for almost 2 years, and through stages, as it becomes stronger, as it becomes more knowledgeable, it will start to let go and climb on its own.
Well,
But
not
it
only
is
that,
able.
further than that, you've seen the reflex where you take a child's palm and you rub your finger on it and they
Mm,
clasp like that. That's by design, so they can hold on to mom while mom is moving around.
so that mom, so not just mom, but then when you look at, so orangutans are solitary creatures, but then if you look at like chimps and gorillas, who are group animals, they have not just a mother, but a group to protect them. You don't have that, or you don't have it in the same way in, say a herd animal whose only defense is let's all cluster around the young.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then if you have enough predators that can break that wall, well, then your only defense is to run. So you better be able to run. So
Well,
because that,
they do things like pushing the wildebeest that they don't like, or the
yeah,
older one, to
yeah,
the
yeah.
outside, that kind of stuff too. But yeah,
But
yeah, for the most part, your example is
but
is
the point is that because different things are needed, different things are prioritized within the body. They have to be, or that creature wouldn't survive. They wouldn't have made it. And you've made this point about um, vegetarianism, that if if you come from, South Asia or parts of East Asia, you come from centuries of your forebearers being born into this diet. So the ones who the offspring who weren't suited for that diet usually didn't make it to reproduction. So you are going to be much more suited to a vegetarian diet than some, white hippie in America who comes from Western European ancestors.
well, but now this is where it all comes together, and this is why I hate this paper, because yes, genetically you're more suited to that diet, but at the same time your microbiome adjusts to what you eat. So you have a marrying of being a product of your genes with a product of your environment, because your environment, what you eat, how it affects your body, is your environment. So if you eat, so you say you have that disposition you just mentioned, right? But you eat McDonald's hamburgers and French fries for 5 years, your microbiome in your gut is fucked up from it, but it is adapted to that, and you're going to feel better eating a McDonald's burger and French fries than you would what would be considered clean eating in your natural habitat for a while. And then your microbiome would shift, And you probably would feel amazing after you shifted it back to where your genetic predisposition is. But at the same time, it's a product of both. In fact, in behaviorism as a thought, as an overarching principle over the kind of the subset, which is behavioral analysis, is the idea is the old BF Skinner merging with Darwinism, that it was your genes affecting, and how your genes and your behaviors affect your environment, and your environments affect your behaviors. So it's an interplay of the two. But to deny that is, I mean, they're saying reimagine, but we've heard those words before. But let me go with one more passage before we get into more just general talk. First, the extended evolutionary synthesis, EES. Why? I mean, come on, you're going to use this word like this subset of words like 4 more times in the paper. Just write it out. Challenges the traditional idea, still prevalent in narrow evolutionary psychology. Why they added the narrow, I don't know.
I think that's further straw manning is what I would
Yeah,
suggest.
because they're I'll go back to the beginning of who they defined this as. And he's up on my, not that I'm taking this personal, but he's up on my bookcase behind me. But first, the extended evolutionary synthesis challenges the traditional idea still prevalent in narrow evolutionary psychology literature that natural selection is the paramount importance in explaining adaptation. Well, it kind of is. And that selection pressures in the whatever Pleistocene epic,
Pleistocene epoch, yeah.
yeah, are responsible for traits that characterize contemporary humans, even though today's people emerge in the context of swiftly changing environments. I made a note for myself in my paper version as I was reading this and spitting and drinking and wanting to punch something. And we're mentally unwell because of this
Eh,
swiftly changing environment, right? That is the whole point. We do live in a different environment than we evolved in, and evolution takes a long, long time. We will naturally select and sexually select for people more adapted for our time. Example, natural selection, you got to stay alive long enough. Here's the definitions here. Natural selection is you got to stay long enough to make babies. You got to stay alive long enough to make babies. Sexual selection is you got to be attractive to the opposite sex to make babies. And usually they go hand in hand because traits that keep you alive tend to be what is selected for sexually. Tend to. Peacock feathers being
mhm.
a common exception to that, right? Uh, but we will select for today's environment. And my example here would be males are losing testosterone over time. Part of that is our environment, the BPAs and all of that. But the other part of it I would contest from an evolutionary standpoint is we're selecting for people who can make money in the modern environment. Being a big, giant, strong alpha male doesn't make a lot of money
Mhm.
in general. But being a great accountant, that makes a lot of money. So your little beta male that can sit in a cubicle all day is making a living and is able to reproduce because
Mm.
he can find a wife, because he makes a living and he has a house and he has a car and he has a
Good
picket
point.
fence. So we are selecting for that. So part of the testosterone drop over time is probably because these people that normally would have been the beta males are reproducing because they can. In fact, because they're desirable, because they're the ones with the resources now. Bill Gates is not an alpha male,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he could have he could have a mating partner anytime he wants.
Yeah. Um, so I'm just looking up here because I'm trying to remind myself of when and it's sooner than I thought it was. Because I was thinking the Pleistocene is when mammals first started to appear and proliferate, which to your point of the length of time evolution takes is much earlier than that. So the Pleistocene uh is the ice age. It's 2.5 million to 11,500 years ago, basically. So this is the age of the hominid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a really freaking long time. And to to illustrate how long it took for us to get to the modern era, Jonah Goldberg in his book Suicide of the West uses kind of this thought experiment to show how quickly humanity changed when it finally changed to what we would call the modern era, uh, generally starting from the Renaissance. Um,
Okay, so I'm relying on Wiki here, but I think on something like this that's non-political is probably going to be pretty
mhm.
accurate. Granulated sugar. How long ago is this? That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
6,000 years ago. What's the worst thing you can eat for your body? Granulated sugar. Crystallized sugar is the worst thing you can put in your body, other than, like arsenic or
Right.
heroin or something.
Other
But
than a literal
it
poison.
is the worst normal food product, legal food product you can put in your body, because it is the road to diabetes. It is the road to so many different
Mhm.
health, diet related illnesses, obesity in general, because it is perfectly formed to be absorbed as quickly as possible and get in your bloodstream. 6,000 years we have not adapted to that. Did we like take a break from granulated sugar to not adapt to it? No, we've been actually progressively upping our intake
Oh yeah.
of that. So
Yeah.
I was going to use grain because the plow was basically when we started eating grains regularly, and still so many people have trouble eating grains,
Mhm.
celiac disease, intolerances and stuff, which we can argue about where those come from, but there is at least something there. There is at least a signal there. But granulated sugar popped in my mind. I was like, I wonder just this moment what the history of that was. 6,000 years. I thought it was going to be a few hundred years, but
Right.
6,000 years, and we still have not adapted
Mhm.
to more slowly digest that or to process it faster.
So Jonah Goldberg's thought experiment, and this works here because it illustrates um the slow pace of physical evolution, and the it, we're confined by our own perceptions of time as finite beings, and of looking around us, so it feels like we've been like this forever. And assume there was an alien race that was flying around, you know studying planets and organic life around the galaxy, and they come to Earth some millions of years ago, and they come back every, say, 1,000 years to check up and see. For millions of years, those checkups would be nothing of interest to note. Very little change, no change, nothing of interest to note. And then all of a sudden, say they came at 1,000 AD, it wouldn't be that different than what they saw at 0 AD. The, you know, coming and looking at Rome at
Well,
1,000 AD versus
that's
0 AD,
because
that's not that different.
that's because water was dangerous to drink, so we were drunk all the time.
But so think about that
Look
from
look up Michael Pollan and the history
yeah.
of caffeine. That's an
Okay,
it's amazing little interview.
I gotta check that out.
It was the
Um,
Dark Ages went for like 1,000 years of people being buzzed from 24/7 because it was safer than water. But
eh,
the merchants went to the Arabic areas and brought back tea and coffee, and you
mhm,
have to boil
mhm.
water to make those. And all of a sudden, we have the Renaissance and the Enlightenment.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. So okay, so for millions of years, very little changed to an outside observer. And then they come back on their most recent visit in 2000 AD, and what the hell happened? All of a sudden, you have electronics, you have incredible metallurgical advancements. The population has exploded over that time, and you go for millions of years of nothing interesting is happening here to, oh my gosh, suddenly we have an advanced technological civilization. It's the blink of not even a geological eye. I don't even know how best to describe it because it is
Well,
that fast.
well, let's look at it this way from a time perspective. If you take the history of the Earth in general, and then you were to do like a 24-hour clock and say when humans existed, period,
Yes,
Homo sapiens,
I was just looking
it
that
would
up.
be like midnight. It would be like like a minute to midnight or something, 2 minutes to midnight. And then in that time, which is about 150,000 years, so in that time, you're talking about 100 years. So one thousandth of the time that we've existed, which is 1 minute on a clock for the day.
I was just trying to look up Homo sapien. I can never remember. I want to say we're only like 200,000 years old is my recollection. Um,
It's the
of
title.
when
It's the title of a chapter in this book. Hold on.
is when the first Homo sapien is dated. The earliest Homo sapien is dated. I want to say it's only like 200,000 years ago. Oh, Homo sapiens emerged again. This is Wikipedia, but this kind of stuff is usually the facts and figures are usually okay. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago, um, from a species commonly designated Homo blah blah blah. Okay, so around 300,000 years ago is is how old Homo sapiens are, and again, for the overwhelming majority of that time, there wasn't a lot of change in our way of life, in how we lived. Um, and at least not documented. I mean, we started this Graham Hancock, so there may be some debate about that, but
Okay,
um,
okay. So the time frame I was thinking of is it actually starts with the Big Bang. If that was January 1st at midnight, so New Year's was the Big Bang. How long humans were here? It would be December 31st, 11:59 and 33 seconds.
wow,
Yeah.
that's uh that's an interesting way to wrap your head around the scale of time here. Um,
And to cite, that was from The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. A very good read, actually not a long read and a very easy read. So uh, I
I
give it a
had another point
recommendation.
here and I forgot where I was going. The scale of time is one of the things that is um oh, I remember the other thought here. So you look at what we kind of now colloquially call the woke movement, which is the hyper postmodernists. And I can't remember who I heard say this recently. It is amusing that when it comes to these uh, rants about gender that we're having now, they utterly reject the binary of sex, and yet their thinking is so binary in everything else. It is it is black or white because what they're doing there is they are they are ignoring or rejecting the nuance of the evolutionary psychology position and saying no, it must be this or that. So that was my read as someone who doesn't know the profession and the literature, but just looking at what they were saying there and trying to translate into actual English instead of academic speak is what they were saying is no, it must be this or that, and we're saying it's this because it makes us feel better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even in their conclusion, the goal of integrating evolutionary sciences into psychology should be to understand the unique evolutionary and developmental paths of human beings. The developmental evolutionary psychology theory, which they've just coined here, depth, that's what they're trying to, the new model they're trying to make, can do just that. How do human beings come to be shaped by processes that are influenced by our evolutionary history, but also by the more proximal contingencies in our developmental histories? That's the point of evolutionary psychology. This is why there are different. We all know every profession has its specialties, right? So if If you go to a doctor, you go to a general prac, but you have a meniscus tear, you go to a orthopedic surgeon after that, because they handle the orthopedic surgery part and they know more about the knee. But that doesn't mean they're going to say, well, but you need to get your eyes checked. Evolutionary psychologists are looking at the evolutionary roots and presenting their data, which even the authors said are very accurate. And then you take that and you apply it to the modern world. They're not trying to do that. They're just trying to find, why is this disconnect happening? What are evolutionary roots? Okay, now you develop a plan around that as a behavioral specialist or as a developmental specialist. And this is actually what's bothering me about this, because I have two major classes other than statistics right now. One is learning and behavior, and the other is so how our behaviors are formed, how we learn them, how we can unlearn them, all of those things. And the other is developmental psych. Which one do you think would be more evolutionary based? Developmental.
I mean,
Because you're
yeah,
admitting there are developmental stages of life, and these are the things
yeah.
that happen at these points, and it's natural. That's a key word there.
It's like a microcosm of evolution within a single person.
But which class have I been using to support my thoughts? Behavioral. BF Skinner, the
Huh.
behaviorism, the genes, and the second chapter, or the first real chapter after the introduction in developmental is evolutionary theory of evolutionary roots. That's why this paper was the legitimate one for our section we're going. The author of this book acknowledges that this is the starting point to how we think about these things. This is something I can speak to from the industry that I'm in, the fitness industry. Why was I ahead of the curve on fasting? Because it didn't make evolutionary sense
Yes.
that you had to eat every 3 hours or you would lose cognitive function. We would have died out as a species a
Oh
long
God.
time ago.
I can't remember if I said this when we were recording, but when I was doing this online certification, um, and
Is
I
this
was
the
texting
grazing
you,
animals?
Randy. Yes,
Yes. Oh.
they used grazing animals as an example for why you should eat multiple small meals a day. They have four-chambered stomachs and a completely different biochemistry that allows them to extract things from plant matter that we
Yes,
cannot.
ruminant animals like your grazing cattle and your sheep and goats and everything can convert direct nitrogen from the soil of the plant they ate to an amino acid. We
And,
cannot do that.
and this was the other thought. This reminded me of the other thought I had while you were talking, and this will be my final thought on this. Is this so represents the absolute corruption of now the harder sciences with what already happened in the humanities, with the corruption of that, with this kind of postmodernist Marxist thinking, and trying to cram things into that worldview. In the most basic, to me, the truest hard science is math. It's 2 + 2 = 4. Well, not anymore, but and if you are solving the most basic of algebraic equations, you know, 5 + x = 10, solve for x. Okay, well, once you've solved for x, oh, x = 3. Okay, well, put it in that equation and see. Oh crap, I got it wrong because it doesn't work.
We
So in
call
some
them mathematical proofs, as in you're
exactly.
proving the objectivity.
So so you can have this idea that you are presenting, but what in those excerpts that you were reading, one of the thoughts I had several times was, but does that make sense in the real world? If you take this idea, this theory, this hypothesis that you have, and you look at it in the real world, is that actually what's happening? And I would say, no.
Yeah, when of course my master's in physiology and biomechanics, and when we were talking about research questions in university, and then when I was doing research with the professors and with NASA and everything, the first question you ask is, does this make biological sense? That's the first question you ask. It doesn't mean that that's the right answer. You say, no, it doesn't. You don't throw it out. You just look at it sideways until somebody shows you something that causes it to make biological sense. It's not everything makes sense, but at least that's the first filter. And when I read this, I was like, my first thought was, all EP is doing is starting the biological basis. And realistically, this is where BF Skinner and even Pavlov was to some degree way back in the day. They just didn't know how to express it. But all of these disciplines coming together, this is why I like Sapolsky so much, because the way he does his behavioral biology class is he starts with, this is how we're going to do this. Think of a whole row of buckets. And each one of those buckets is a different specialty in biology and psychology. So he'll say ecology, economics is one of the buckets he has. Straight up molecular biology, genetics, all of these buckets. And he say, okay, so here's what they're contributing. And if we dip from all of these buckets, what is the recipe we end up coming up with for the function of a human being?
So I want to share this real quick. I've referenced this
I think I
before.
made it to where you can.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna share the screen so you can see the title and go watch this if you're interested in this kind of stuff before History Channel copyright strikes it. But this was one of the few times the History Channel put something on this good, and it's a great documentary on Einstein generally, but specifically, get it, math pun, science pun, the theory of relativity. First, the specific relativity, and then general relativity of. And there's some great physicists here who do a good job of explaining what it means in layman's terms, but then also giving you the technical explanation of how this came to be. And when he first came up with this idea, it took him years to come up with the mathematical proofs. And then once he had done that, and he presented that, okay, but then you have to find the real world example of it. All right, well, it's all right. You've gone through this very complicated mathematical equation to show this is general relativity. And he had said, okay, but then how do we observe this? How do we see that this is true in the real world? And there was a test for it, which was that if what he is saying is true, then light will be bent by the gravity of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So in a full solar eclipse, we can take pictures and we can look for the stars closest to the sun, and they will be offset. And they do a great job of explaining it, and they show you the pictures that were eventually able to be taken to show that, yeah, this is what's happening.
So we need to close out. So I'm going to sock you back to why I had a problem with this article in the second sentence, which I have highlighted here. Excuse me, the third sentence. Proponents of narrow evolutionary psychology, which is a coin they termed, a term they coined here for the sake of their own paper. Proponents of NEP have long argued that their brand of evolutionary psychology represents a full-fledged scientific revolution, with recently likening NEP's scientific impact to that of Copernican or Darwinian paradigm shift. And I highlighted that first part there because, again, they cited this person, 2020, as, it's not a quotation, it's a representation of him that they thought important enough to cite him. He has never made that argument. It was a straw man from sentence 3. And I probably would have fell for it if I wasn't so familiar with his work. but their whole paper is contingent on that statement being true. That they've argued that their brand of psychology represents a full-fledged scientific revolution. Has it been a revolution? Yes, to some degree, because people started realizing, oh, well, this dysfunction is probably related to the fact that it takes a long time for people to evolve. And you brought up the whole trans and binaries and stuff earlier. I don't think it's this paper doesn't go in the woke direction at any point that I've noticed, but I don't think it's a surprise that the branch of psychology that relies on male and female existing and you know the fact that sometimes our behavior doesn't match what's actually genetically predisposed in our brain, and culture can conflict with how you actually naturally are, because remember, postmodernist culture is everything, right? Whereas if you're conflicted by your culture, you're going to have dysfunction, which is one of the things they do argue. It's like, yeah, we're dysfunctional in a, we'll take it back to physiology so I can stay in my lane until I graduate, right? Uh, Granulated sugar again. We have a culture of eating a shit ton of that,
Mm-hmm.
and our bodies are not healthy from it. So take it to the psychological literature. Well, one of the things that they're positing in evolutionary psychologists, what are the things that changed rapidly for us now that aren't very conducive for how we're developed? Men, for example, men have a meaning crisis. You know, the Peterson argument. Well, we had a very easy road to meaning in the past. Get up, hunt food, bring food home, feed family, have sex,
Or else you
make
die.
babies. Yeah. Or else you die and you don't reproduce. Meaning was easy for men
Mhm.
at a certain point. Difficult physically, but very easy psychologically. Now you go to the grocery store, the police handle the crooks, and what the hell? Why? Where's my meaning? Well, I can make money. Well, so does my wife. Uh, she actually makes more money than me. Oh crap! Now what do I do? Uh, Now it becomes complicated.
Mhm.
But the first step to that is saying, oh, well, we evolved for thousands of years in the easy way, and now we're in a different environment. That's all EP is saying. We're in a different
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
The process to how we fix it, well, that's for the other people to figure out. But they can't figure it out unless they know the root. Radical behaviorism, this is something I did learn this year because they actually use a different definition for the word radical. Radical isn't extreme, radical is the root cause
Hmm.
in behaviorism. So I was like, oh, well, that makes sense now. Radical behaviorism is we need to know the root cause before we can fix it. EP is providing the root cause. And hey, look, this is the thing that's happening in the dating scene according to dating apps that supports our theory that we're probably built different. Now you fix it over there, you
Hmm.
clinical person.
Yeah, back to your earlier analogy. You go to your GP, or even someone like you who's not a medical doctor, but who knows this is how this joint is supposed to work. It's not working that way. Something is wrong. Okay, now go to the specialist to find out exactly what is wrong and fix it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, yeah, it just threw me off because I hate papers like this. That first of all, it's tribal. That
Yeah.
we talk about division and unity. We could be a little bit more unifying. I think the EP people would be very happy to be part of the mix and not just having to fight for their place.
Yeah.
Maybe that would help. Uh, but again, it's I don't know. It's the way they made their own division there. The depth, developmental evolutionary psychology theory. It's like no, we'll just work together. You know, don't try to take. Uh, it just bothered me. Sorry, I'm rambling here, and I know you got to go. So,
No, well, again, this is what's so frustrating about this is I want to, like we always do, try and close with a broader view. But one of the problems we have right now is, and you've talked about this in the past, we need specialists and we need experts because not everyone can do everything.
But we
So,
also need generalists.
mhm.
And you can't have generalists if everybody's trying to push the other specialties away.
And it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for people to navigate the world when they don't know who they can trust because they don't know who is being intellectually honest with both themselves and with their readers or viewers. And you can't go digging into all of this by yourself. Eventually, though, anyone should be able to come to a point where, so you have this narrative, this preconceived notion, this rule, if you will. When that bumps into a conflict, you need to be able to look back at your presuppositions and say, is this the case? Really be self-critical and try and figure out, am I trying to cram a square peg into a round hole here? Do I need to look at my presuppositions?
Have you seen the video where the person, the kid, is putting the square peg in the square hole, but every shape ends up fitting in the square hole? So they're
No.
the round one was just the right size that it still fit in the one, and then the rectangle, they turned it sideways, but it was square sideways, so they tipped it in, and
No. Is that analogy? All
yeah.
right. Well, that's it for part one. We will be back later. Sweet
To
baby
bitch
Jesus,
and
help
moan
me.
about Wheel
Uh,
of Time. And this show is so broken, we can't even blame woke. It is so broken.
oh, I
I,
can.
I have, I
I'll show
have,
you how.
oh no, we will definitely. I have specifically in my notes. Hold on, I have a lot of notes.
I had like 3 pages of
The,
notes on episode one, and then I
the
just
word
stopped.
many times because I was taking these notes in real time, and I would be in the middle of writing something like, oh, I kind of like the da da da, and then it would derail right in front of my
Oh
eyes.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
would just go,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, that will be part two later. So look
Yeah.
forward to
After
that.
my class where we're discussing this paper where that I just bitched and moaned about. So I got a little practice. I don't know. I like my group, and this is that we I like the way the class is structured. We have small groups of 5 people that we're basically going to go through the whole semester with, and we have different roles for each class. And they probably gave me the right role on this one. I'm just the note taker for the meeting instead of the person who wrote the summary of the article, or the person who linked it to other articles, or the person who leads the discussion, or the person who attaches the article to the material that we're going. Because I would have not been able to resist writing a book of bitching and moaning for any of those. So I can talk, and I determine what is put in the notes. So uh, the teacher won't know my thoughts going into it, but
Might be
my
a good
group
thing.
will.
All right. Well, we will see y'all then.
See you later.